It's the Santa Fe F3 from Menards.
All right, folks, so this is history in the making. This is the first O-gauge locomotive to be made by Menards. As my lovely assistant said, it's the Santa Fe F3, and we're going to check it out right now on Eric's Trains. All right, so of course, I'm not the first person to do a video on this locomotive, but hopefully it'll be the best video on this locomotive. I did write a review for this engine for OGR magazine, and so that's why it took me a little bit longer to come out with the video. Anyway, just a little bit of a disclaimer for those of you who don't know. This model could be considered a beta release. Menards only made 200 of these, so I feel really fortunate that I was able to get a hold of one of these. You can't buy them now on the Menards site. They've all sold out. The only way you can get one at this point, October 2021 is when I'm filming this, is to find one on eBay, and in that case you're going to pay a price much higher than they originally sold for, which I would not recommend doing. I'll talk more about that in just a minute. Anyway, so yeah, what Menards did is rather than making a big giant production run, they decided to test the waters. So they only made 200 of these and they put them on their site. They sold out within minutes, which to me means there's high demand for a Menards locomotive, and so based on that, they've said that they're going to do a full production run at some point in the future, although Menards has not specified a date. So because this is a beta release, keep in mind that anything you see on this locomotive during this review could change by the time the full production model comes out. All right, so with all that said, the first thing I want to talk about with this model is the price, because the price is really the key feature of this model around which everything else revolves. Menards was selling this locomotive on their website for right at $146, and I believe if you used the Menards rebate program, you could get one of these for as low as $129, which is a fantastic price for what you're getting here. $129, $146, great deal for a wonderful model. Now, as I said, they sold out, and so if you want one now, the only way you can really get one is on eBay, and I have seen some sellers selling these things for way more than the original asking price, which I think is a little bit crooked, to be honest. There's a certain seller on eBay, I won't say his name, but I've posted about him before. He doesn't have very good customer service. He's very rude to his customers. And he is selling one of these things, at least right now, for $400. Now, I wouldn't buy anything from that seller, let alone paying $400 for one of these things. No way. Do not pay $400 for one of these locomotives. That would be a colossal waste of money. Now, I'm not insulting the locomotive. It's a great model for $130, $146, maybe even $200. But $400, no way, any day. Major ripoff. If you're going to spend $400, you'd be better off buying a Lionel Lion Chief Plus locomotive or an MTH locomotive. You can get one of those for not much more than $400, or buy a used MTH or Lionel locomotive. That would be money much better spent than spending $400 on one of these. If you want to buy one of these on eBay, assuming you can find one, personally, I would not recommend paying over $200 for one of these, because like I said, at $130, $145, $200, it's a great locomotive, but for $400, it's just not worth it. Now, Menards has called this the Santa Fe F3, and there's been some grumblings in the O-gauge world that it looks closer to an F7, which is true. But all I'll say about that is that, the price point of this model, as I said before, is really the key feature. Everything else is sort of icing on the cake. So if you're looking for a super accurate model, this is probably not for you. If, however, you're looking for ultra cheap, reliable O-gauge motive power that looks fantastic, you've hit the jackpot. Now, even though this is not a super detailed, highly prototypical model, they did a fantastic job on it. I mean, the length of this thing is right at 13 inches, which is actually longer than my Lionel scale F3s and F7s. So it certainly doesn't feel like some small, wimpy, semi-scale model. I don't know if it's built to scale scale, but it looks pretty close. So we're going to take a closer look at this thing now, and as we do, I want you to try to take note of all the ways in which Menards has taken steps to reduce the cost to manufacture these things without actually affecting how it looks and feels. You know, it's one thing to make a cheap model that looks cheap. That's easy. It's quite another thing to make a cheap model that looks and feels high quality, and that's exactly what they've done here. You know, they've made some concessions here and there to bring the price down, but not in ways that are totally obvious and scream cheapness, and that's really one of the coolest things about this model, other than the price, of course. Okay, so first up, let's weigh this thing because, you know, you think $130 diesel, it's got to be flimsy and lightweight. It's got a good weight in the hand. Let's put it on the scale here. And it weighs in at 3 pounds, 7.4 ounces, which is great. That's right up there with your average O-scale diesel. No problem there. And the reason for that is because, you know, you'd think it would be all cheap plastic, but it's not. You've got an ABS plastic shell, just like most other O-scale diesels, and then you've got die-cast metal trucks, truck side frames, pilot, and couplers. The couplers are operating. They've got the thumbtack mechanism, and the front and back couplers have that, so they both are operating couplers. The fuel tank area is plastic, unlike most high-end diesels where it's die-cast metal, but that's okay. The frame is still metal, and I was surprised how much die-cast metal was on this thing for such a cheap model. So really, you know, even though it's $130, it's got a good weight and good construction. Now, this engine is driven by 2 DC can motors. We'll talk more about those later, but there's one above each truck, and so when I tested the pulling power on this engine, it produced about 1 pound 5 ounces of pulling power, which is a little bit less than you would find on a high-end Lionel or MTH diesel. Those will usually have maybe 2 pounds, 2.5 pounds of pulling power. But at this price point, that's okay. You know, that's a recurring thing about this model, is that at the price point for $130 or $145, a lot of things that are shortcomings or not as good as the big Lionel and MTH engines, you just sort of shrug your shoulders and say, who cares? So going in for some close-ups, here you can see they did a great job on the Pilot and trucks. They've got this really sharp-looking chrome finish. Now, obviously, that's not very realistic. I'm sure the original Santa Fe F3s and F7s didn't have a mirror chrome finish on the Pilots and trucks, but it looks great nonetheless. And I think it's kind of fitting, seeing as this is Menards' first locomotive. It's kind of celebratory in a way. So yeah, and they've got it all over the place, even on the little ladders here. All die-cast metal, like I said, and thumbtack couplers. Let me see if I can... There we go. And here's that fuel tank area. They've got some nice hand-painted details right here. Again, not die-cast metal like you'd find on higher-end diesels. It's plastic, but they've still got that nice mirror chrome finish. And hey, check out the nose and cab. It looks fantastic. You've got this beautiful Santa Fe Super Chief logo up front. A little F right there, nice touch. Lighted number boards, I didn't expect that. They're pretty dimly lit, but the fact that they're lit at all is pretty impressive at this price point. And by the way, you're gonna hear me say that phrase a lot during this video. Pretty impressive at this price point because it's true of pretty much everything on this model. We've got an operating headlight up front, and this unit does have directional lighting. Again, impressive at this price point. And for those of you who don't know, directional lighting means that when you're going forward, the headlight is on, and when you change direction and go backwards, the headlight turns off and the backup light turns on. Right here on the side of the cab, there is a builder's plate. There's nothing printed on it. It's not legible or anything, but the fact that it's there is pretty cool. All of the doors and steps and so forth are molded into the body. No big surprise there. Clear plastic inserts in all the windows, and hey, there are 2 hand-painted crew figures inside the cab. Again, there's a lot of stuff I wasn't expecting at this price point. Here in the middle, we've got some nice rivet detail going on, although don't start counting rivets on this model. In a cost-saving move, the vents up here are molded into the plastic body, so there's no add-on see-through metal vents on this model, but that's okay at this price point. And we do have clear plastic inserts in these porthole windows, which is nice. The windows up front are blacked out on the other side to prevent you from seeing any electronics on the other side. These on the back, however, are not blacked out, so you can see some wires and so forth if you look really carefully inside these windows. Here's a look at the back. As expected, all the detail is molded into the plastic body. However, as I mentioned earlier, there is an operational backup light right here, and it's a very bright white light. And then down here, we've got the other thumbtack style coupler. Up on the roof, we've got these two nice horns. They are plastic, however, they do have that nice mirrored chrome finish. And then right here, you'll notice there's a scuff. There's a few scuffs on the roof of this model. Those were not there when the engine was brand new. I didn't buy this brand new from Menards. I actually bought it secondhand from someone who was kind enough to sell it to me at the original price. And when they shipped it to me, it got a little scuffed up in the box, and so that's why there's a few little scuffs up here. No big deal, but I did want to point those out. And in the middle, we've got some fans that are molded into the plastic body and some smokestacks. There's no operating smoke unit on this model, but again, at this price point, who cares? And then toward the back, we've got some more detail molded into the plastic body, which looks just fine. Here's a look at the underside. They've got a continuation of all that nice mirrored chrome finish. That's why I'm wearing these gloves, so that I don't get fingerprints all over it. There's a switch right here that activates or deactivates the sound system. So if you like to run these things old school with no sound at all, you can do that by flipping this switch right here. They've got two pickup rollers, one on each truck, which is nice. And surprisingly, there are 4 traction tires on this engine, 2 back here and 2 up here. One other nice thing down here is that all of the axles on this model are driven. There are no non-powered axles or wheels anywhere. Now, one drawback of this drive system, however, is that in the drive system, they use nylon gears rather than metal gears, and that is done to save money. I get it. At this price point, you want to save money where you can, and so they chose to use nylon gears over metal gears. But it should be noted that over time, nylon gears will tend to split and break and need to be replaced. It won't happen immediately, not unless you're running this thing really hard, like 100 miles a day. But over time, maybe 5-10 years in the future, these nylon gears will tend to break and split, and you'll have to replace them if you can find a replacement. Lionel used a lot of nylon gears when they were making their engines in the 70s and 80s, and those engines had a lot of issues with the gears splitting and breaking. And so that's why these days, for the most part, unless it's a really, really cheap model, Lionel doesn't use nylon gears anymore. But like I've been saying the whole time, if Menards was selling this model for $400, or if you bought it on eBay for $400, these nylon gears would be a big issue. But at this price point, again, who cares? However, that said, if I was going to give some feedback to Menards, I would suggest that they maybe go with metal gears on the final production version of this model rather than the nylon gears. Even if it meant raising the price of the model by a few bucks, in my opinion, it would be worth it. Now, while we're down here, let's go ahead and open this thing up so you can take a look at what's inside. I believe there are at least 4 screws holding the shell onto the body, so we'll go ahead and take those out. All right. Yep, just 4 screws. And it all comes out as one piece. That's nice. I gotta say, it looks really good in here. They did a great job of making this thing look organized and clean cut. They're using modular connections on all the wires. A lot of times on really inexpensive electronics, you'll see a rat's nest of wires going everywhere with no organization whatsoever, and those wires will be permanently soldered into place rather than using modular connectors, but that's not the case here. It looks very nice. So up front, we've got the LED for the headlight and the 2 LEDs for the number boards. Behind that, we've got the 2 crew figures hot glued into place. Behind that, we've got one of the 2 DC can motors. We'll get back to those in just a second. Behind that, we've got the sound and control board with those 2 big capacitors on top. The speaker for the sound system is down in the fuel tank like it normally is on a no-gauge diesel. Behind that is the second DC can motor, and at the rear is the LED for the backup light. It's kind of interesting, they've even got that mirrored chrome finish on the inside. It must have been cheaper just to mirror chrome the whole darn thing, rather than pick and choose which parts were chromed and which ones weren't. Now, about the DC can motors, you'll notice that these motors do not have flywheels on top. Most modern O-gauge locomotives come with flywheel-equipped motors. Why? Well, the flywheels help with smooth starts and stops. If you don't have those flywheels, the locomotive will have very abrupt starts and stops, especially stops. If the engine is going at a good clip and you suddenly cut power, without a flywheel on top, it'll just stop dead, and that can cause a derailment with all the cars behind it. Now, is that a deal breaker? No, not at all. The flywheel-equipped motor is a fairly modern convenience. Lionel didn't start outfitting their locomotives with flywheels until, oh gosh, maybe sometime in the late 80s or sometime in the 90s. Anything made before that didn't have flywheels. And if you've ever run an older locomotive, something from the MPC era or the post-war era, you'll note that they have very abrupt starts and stops because there's no flywheel. So this is going to operate more like a traditional old school post-war locomotive than a modern O-gauge locomotive. So you just have to be really careful with those stops and starts to make sure you don't cause any derailments. Now, the lack of flywheels on these motors is most likely a cost-cutting measure. I get that. It's probably a lot cheaper to use generic DC can motors rather than flywheel-equipped motors. Now, again, if I was giving some feedback to Menards, me personally, I would like to see some flywheel-equipped motors on the final production version. Even if it means raising the cost of the model by a few bucks, I think it would be worth it, just like I think it'd be worth it to upgrade those nylon gears to metal gears. But again, it's not a deal breaker, and like I keep saying, for 130 bucks, 145 bucks, nobody's gonna care. All right, now comes the fun part. We're gonna start this thing up and check out some of the features, and then we'll take it for a spin around the layout. Now, when you buy one of these Menards Santa Fe F3s, included in the box will be a remote control, and here it is. And as you can see, it bears a striking similarity to the Lionel Lion Chief remotes, although this one has a volume knob on the side, which I like a lot. So you got the power switch there, forward, reverse, horn, crew talk, and bell, Santa Fe 3945, and Menards Railroad. Now, as many of you know, whenever you buy a Menards structure, they usually have a little figurine of Jack the German Shepherd somewhere on the structure because Jack is the mascot for Menards. Well, they couldn't put a figurine of Jack on the F3, so they've got him on the back of the remote control. How cool is that? You know, it wouldn't be a true Menards product without Jack the German Shepherd hiding somewhere, and I think it's really cute that they put him on the back of the remote. And while we're back here, this thing does take 3 AAA batteries that you have to supply yourself. So we're gonna go ahead and start this thing up. I'm gonna tell you now that the sound effects on this model, they're okay. They're not great, but they're okay. Again, if you were paying $400 for this locomotive, you might be disappointed in the sound effects, but for $130, $145, they're just fine, and really nobody's gonna care. All right, so I'm gonna power up the track, and as soon as I do, this thing will start making some noise. Now, one nice thing is that those big capacitors that you saw inside the locomotive earlier, well, if the power to the track gets cut, the engine will stay on for a few seconds because of those capacitors, and so that'll help the engine and the sound system get over any dead spots in your track or any sections of dirty rail. Anyway, so you'll notice the headlight is not on at this time. It will not turn on until we actually start moving forward. The number boards are lit, although, as I said earlier, they are pretty dimly lit, but I'll do a night shot in just a minute and you'll see they are lit. All right, so here's the horn. Yeah, not the best horn ever, but if you work the button a little bit, you can get it sounding a little bit better. Yeah, and here's the bell sound, which is a little bit better than the horn, actually. Kind of an abrupt stop, but that's okay. And lastly, here are the crew talk sounds, and this was a big surprise because not only do they sound pretty good, but there's also road number specific dialogue, which is crazy for something at this price point.
The air brake test was good, so let's get ready to move.
Roger that. We are ready to roll.
Then let's go. Dispatcher, 3945 East is ready to proceed.
3945 East, confirm you're ready. Aligning choices to track 1. Have a good trip.
Dispatch, I see the signal has gone from red to green. We are moving.
Check. The signal is green.
Moving from track 5 to track 1. Track 1 lamp is green.
that was a pretty cool announcement. They mentioned Menards.
3945 East, you are clear of Menards.
That's awesome.
Dispatcher, 3945 East, approaching mile 243. Slowing to go in the hole.
Confirm 3945 East, aligning to sighting. Roger 3945 East, when Amtrak 7201 East clears, you are clear to mile 375.
Yeah, so quite a lot of crew talk sequences, road number specific dialogue, and they also mentioned Menards during some of the crew talk sequences. Very well done. All right, now it's showtime. Let's go ahead and run this thing around the layout. Now, when I start this thing up, you're going to notice how abrupt the start is, and I'll show you one of the abrupt stops later on. And again, that's due to the lack of flywheels on those DC can motors. I've got 12 O-scale cars behind this right now just to demonstrate the pulling power, which is good. And then later I'll put some passenger cars behind it as well. So let's move it out. I gotta say, this thing looks really good at night. right, here comes that abrupt stop. All All right, so there you have it, the Menards Santa Fe F3. I think this is a fantastic offering, especially considering it's Menards' first locomotive. I can't wait until the final production version comes out because I'm sure that'll be just as nice, if not better. And again, that price, $145, is just incredible. I'm really excited to see the full production version of this model when it arrives, and when it does, I'm sure they'll do additional road names as well. You know, I hope they fix the nylon gear issue and the flywheel issue that I mentioned earlier, but if they don't, it's no big deal because, as I keep on saying, for $145, nobody's going to care. You know, that's the universal truth about this model and most of the stuff that Menards makes. If anybody has any criticisms about this model, you can just say, hey, it's $145. Get over it. I mean, I don't even know how Menards sells these things for so little money. I do have a theory. I think that the person or people who decided to start making trains at Menards, I think they just love model railroading and they're doing it for fun. And so the goal is not to make a big profit. I mean, I don't think the future of Menards as a corporation is hinging on the sale of their model trains. At least I hope not. And so when that's the case, when you're just doing it for fun and you're just trying to break even, which is what I think they're trying to do, you don't have to sell these things for a lot. You can sell them at really low prices. That's not the case when you have companies like Lionel or MTH and Atlas because, you know, with Lionel, first of all, the models are more expensive to make, but also the sales of those models and the profits from those sales are what drive the entire company, and so they have to make a profit from the sales of those trains. Whereas Menards, I don't think they really have to, and so it's really win-win for everybody. Menards gets to have fun making trains, and we get really nice trains for dirt cheap. And again, the last thing I want to do is reiterate about the price of these things and how much you should pay for them if you decide to buy one on eBay. My advice is that if you don't have one of these, just wait for the full production version. But if you absolutely have to have one and you find one on eBay, don't pay too much for it. You know, I could see $150, $175, $200. I could even see $225 or $250 if you just have to have one. It's worth $145. It's a fantastic locomotive at that price, but at $400, it's just not worth it. And you know, with that same $400, when the final production version comes out, you could buy 2 of these and still have some money left over for a couple of freight cars from Menards. Anyway, that's about all I have to say. If you'd like to support this channel, I would greatly appreciate it. That can be done through Patreon at patreon.com/Eric'sTrains. I'd like to put a big thank you out there to all of my current Patreon supporters. Your support means the world, not only to me, but to the future of this channel. Patreon supporters get all sorts of perks and benefits, and you can read about those benefits on my Patreon page. And finally, if you'd like to buy an Eric's Trains t-shirt or anything else I might be selling, check out the Eric's Trains online store at ericstrains.com/store. Anyway, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. I'm Eric Siegel, and I'll see you next time.